Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, as the case may be. Welcome back to Soccer Made in Portland. This is Mao speaking, and on your video screen momentarily. And Kelly McLean, as always, joins me.
Good
He
morning.
is also on the screen. As you can see, he is honoring the return of the NBA and the Portland Trail Blazers with his Rip City sweatshirt, which is, I think, something that everybody here in Portland's happy about. Other places, maybe not so much. But anyway, we're back. We're happy to be back with you. Today is Tuesday, and it's November 29th, last day of November as far as our show is concerned. We've got a bunch of Timbers news, both in terms of rosters, in terms of scheduling. We've got all kinds of interesting things to talk about in relation to the expansion draft related to Portland directly, and then we're going to have a guest from Montreal about halfway through the show who is going to give us a breakdown from the Impact's point of view. Of course, that is kind of everything that's going on in Montreal right now. And yeah, so we're just going to, I guess, jump right in.
Let's
Let me
do
just
it.
quickly note, let me just quickly note the day in history. As I mentioned, it's November 29th. On this day in 1980, the Timbers played the San Diego Sockers down in San Diego, and this was indoor. This was the Timbers' first season of indoor. And as far as I'm concerned, I think, anyway, the only Timbers game ever to be played on November 29th. The Timbers did lose 6-4, unfortunately. I wish I had a better score line to bring, or options to choose from, wins or as opposed to losses. But there it is. Timbers lost 6-4. They did get 2 goals from John Bain, got a Stuart Lee goal and Clyde Best goal. But there you go. Timbers 4, San Diego Sockers 6. I don't know. I guess let's just start with some of the most immediate news. This just came through literally 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago. The Timbers announced that they will be debuting in the 2012 season on Monday, March 12th at Gerald Wynn Field. And there are, I think it's the only game on the Monday.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. And a Monday game, I mean, I don't know if they're planning something special, a la the soccer night in America that Fox Soccer did on Friday nights or whatever, if this will be a special Monday thing that will reoccur throughout the season with the new NBC kind of deal or what. But, they do get to headline on a Monday night, so that could be good.
Yeah, and it's, it leads me to believe that maybe they'll be playing Montreal. Obviously, there's the possibility Montreal could be playing Vancouver in the first weekend, and that would be sort of kind of like the way Vancouver started the year last year with a big rivalry game. We know that first-year teams get a little bit of special treatment on opening weekend, whether that is the Timbers, getting the opportunity to play the MLS Cup holders, which was a very nice present for, welcome to MLS. Other teams have had home games, or like Philadelphia played in Seattle, big national TV game, those kinds of things. So they like to highlight the new team, possibly with a new stadium, possibly with, in a situation where there's a good crowd for TV. And I think Portland pretty well proved that last year, that the games are sort of must-see nationally in terms of the crowd. Obviously, a Monday night game is going to be an extremely late start for the East Coast, which we talked about last week. So we'll see. We'll have to see how that plays out. But there are actually, I can run through them real quick. There's only, I guess, 10 possible teams that can be playing the Timbers because there are 8 other teams making their home debut the same weekend. So none of them can possibly be the Timbers' opening game opponents. Right. As I mentioned, it could be Montreal, it could be Sporting Kansas City, Real Salt Lake, Philadelphia, Chicago, Columbus, New England, Toronto, New York, and Houston. In other words, the Timbers could be hosting one of their 5 Eastern Conference games in the season opener. The only team in the Eastern Conference that has a home game in the first weekend or first week is DC United. Every other home team, the first round of games is in the West. So I assume that's weather related, although Colorado is one of the teams that is hosting a game in the first weekend. So it's not a across the board deal, but so Monday, March 12th, we now have a date to circle. It's nice not to have to wait a month for the first home game for the Timbers this year, as we had to do in 2011. Obviously that was stadium related, but Monday, March 12th. And at some point, I assume we'll get that information sooner than the rest of the schedule, who the actual opponent is. Believe that happened last year. That even though the entire schedule wasn't released, we found out that the Timbers would be playing in Colorado.
It did. I thought the press release that I read, I think, said that they were going to release the opponents of the first matches as well as the rest of the schedule at the same time. I thought that's what I had read.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see for that. I expect that will be, if they're going to hold, if they're going to hold it for the entire schedule, I expect that will not be until January or something. I think that's what we're hearing. Certainly won't be for a while. But anyway, it's good to know that the season does start earlier as we expected it would for everyone. A couple other bits of news, Timbers related. I guess we'll start with the retirement first. Kevin Goldthwait retired. I wouldn't say it's completely unexpected. He had a season-ending injury, and he's been around training, but I don't even think he was out doing anything other than, we saw him, in postseason just throwing a football with Jack Jewsbury. Right. He wasn't really involved, and he had a 7-year career in MLS, and was pretty well plagued by injuries. I think he only played something like 91 games over 7 years in the league. Now that has direct implications for the Timbers monetarily. He was making quite a bit of money relative to some of the other players in the team, making $110,000 in a base salary, and I think the guaranteed compensation was $126,000. So it's kind of interesting because the immediate press release after announcing his retirement was the Timbers re-signing of Troy Perkins and David Horst, and I think something that we had discussed was the Timbers needing to pick up all of Troy Perkins' salary this year, whereas last year he was only on about half.
Right. And the financial impact there is I think particularly important just because we didn't have much of Kevin at all during the season. It would be one thing if you had a guy who gave significant minutes and had a big impact and still you got that money off the books. But with Goldthwait, he rarely played, only a handful of games. So having the fact that not only do we get that money, but we can actually use that to get some bodies that are actually going to see minutes, I think will be huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I feel bad for Kevin. He's a guy that they obviously signed in the second division at the very end of last year, or at the very end of 2010, I should say, where I think the expectation was that he would join the Timbers in MLS. And he had a history with John Spencer, having played with him in Houston and things. And, for him to get injured the way he did and for him to have the bad start that he did is frustrating for him. I'm sure that his career ends in that way. But it is, as you said, a chance to sort of change things up and also lock in Troy Perkins, which I think is a really important thing for the team. In that press release with the re-signing, well, actually, I should mention if Troy Perkins and David Horst were re-signed, and then there were a number of players then there were also 16 players that had said their options were picked up. That means those 16 players had contract lengths of more than 1 year, where the team had the option to extend, whereas Perkins and Horst were on 1 year contracts. They didn't have options to be picked up. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the Timbers were thinking when they signed these players. Contract lengths are often things that are not available unless someone happens to share the length of the contract. So
but weren't Perkins and Horst, weren't they coming from MLS teams already, so they could have had contracts in place.
1 year left. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. For sure. I guess it means that that's what they had left. But yeah, I wonder if Perkins had been a disaster, they wouldn't have been tied down, and maybe that's what made the deal so attractive to make the trade in the first place. Now we know that he is locked up. We don't know how long, of course, but I would imagine a multiple year contract.
I would assume
was in order, based both on performance and sort of import with the team.
Yeah.
Players who did not do so well in terms of maintaining a place with the Timbers. A few of them are fairly obvious. A couple of others may be slightly more surprising. One off the top was Brian Umoni. He was on loan, and we did not exactly expect him to return, especially as reports started to come out that he was on trial with Ajax of Cape Town and other things like that. It seemed like that probably wasn't going to be continuing, and sure enough, he is not going to be back with the Timbers next year. A couple of other guys that aren't really surprising. Aiden Brown, who we kind of discussed at length, will not be back. He did not have his option picked up, and that means the Timbers will need to add some sort of a third keeper at some point from somewhere. And Ryan Poor, who I think has also been widely discussed. That's something we're going to ask our guest about, whether or not that situation is continuing in Montreal, whether or not Ryan Poor is just kind of out there floating in the ether at the moment. He may, I suppose he could go into the reentry draft. I'm not, because he does have 4 years of MLS experience. So I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with Ryan Poor. I do know that he will not be back with the Timbers next year. I think that became pretty obvious during the middle of the season. And then the other guys, so they dropped two of the developmental players, Rodrigo Lopez and Spencer Thompson. That kind of makes sense in a way. I feel like the team will probably always want to have a spot or two open for developmental players, so they can bring in a draft pick they like, or just have some flexibility to have some extremely low paid young players who have the potential for development.
Right.
Spencer Thompson was injured for most of the season, or most of the second half of the season, and Rodrigo Lopez, I think he led the team in minutes in the reserve team, but he really didn't even have much of an impact in the reserves. And the biggest surprise, I think, is Peter Lowry. And we're going to take a break after we end this segment, so I don't know how long you want to talk about Peter, but I was a little bit surprised to see the Timbers not bring him back. I don't know that he had a place in the team as it exists at the moment. But what did you think about that?
Well, I think you're right. I think he was probably the biggest surprise on that list, just in terms of, if you went down through the list and said, okay, they probably won't bring these guys back, I think he would have been somebody that I probably would have assumed or guessed that they would bring back. But on the other hand, I guess I'm not totally shocked that they didn't. There are a couple of interesting things though in this list. Personally, for myself, I'm intrigued by the Aiden Brown situation. I think the whole keeper situation is pretty intriguing, because you've got Perkins, who I think should be the guy. I mean, how old is Perkins? Is he 30 or 31?
I think he's 31.
I think he's 31. To me, Perkins should be the guy, and he should kind of be your long-term guy. I mean, I've been a big Troy Perkins fan for a long time. I think he showed this season that he's a guy that you would want as your goalkeeper for the next, whatever it is, 5 to 10 years. We know that goalkeepers, hit their prime a little bit older and last a little bit longer. But then you've also got Jake Gleason, who should be sitting in the number 2 spot, and who knows what happens with him? I mean, is he a guy who could be an MLS number 1 long-term starter? Is he somebody that could go overseas at some point? I mean, there's some big questions there about what you do with those guys. And then that third goalkeeper spot. I mean, do you have some young guy? Do you use a draft pick on a college player and just pick up a goalkeeper because you assume that your third string keeper is rarely going to get used? Or do you keep a guy like Aiden Brown around because he's got experience and he can help out a young guy like Gleason? I think that's a pretty interesting little situation there, and how the Timbers go about and pursue that. I suppose it's possible that Aiden Brown could still end up on the Timbers. If he decides to go through the re-entry draft, it might be likely that no one picks him up, and maybe the Timbers re-sign him for the minimum
less money,
for the minimum amount that they can, because he's a good locker room guy. He's obviously a good going to be a good teacher and a coach to a young guy like Gleason. And if it comes down to it, I mean, is anybody going to feel bad if Aiden Brown steps into a game? I mean, I'm not. The guy's got a ton of experience. He's a good goalkeeper, and it might fit for him as well, because he's been injury prone. Maybe a third string, maybe that would be the perfect spot for him. He can go out and train every day, and in the off chance that you do need him, he'd be there for a game or two, and I don't think anybody would be too disappointed about having that. But I think the goalkeeping situation for me personally is quite intriguing, and I was surprised to see Aiden Brown sort of let go, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was back on the team next year, to be honest with you.
Well, really quickly, just my last thought on the Timbers changes in this regard is that I was a little surprised to see Steve Purdy's name on the keeping list. I felt like he was pretty much out of favor with John Spencer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after a certain point, he just wasn't being played anymore. And I mean, in the first team, he was playing in the reserves. And, I don't know, there was just something happened where he had either a falling out or they just didn't rate him anymore. But it just seems kind of strange that, one of the areas where the team, or where I think a lot of fans think the team needs a lot of help, is in the sort of wide backs, the outside backs.
Right.
And the Timbers keep Chris Taylor, Rodney Wallace, Mike Chabala, Lavelle Palmer, and Steve Purdy all under contract. They pick up options on all those guys. So regardless of what happens, and even though some of those guys aren't getting paid a lot, particularly Purdy and Taylor are not getting paid much at all, they've got 5 outside backs. And I know Purdy's backup for he could be a center back in a pinch, and with Goldthwait gone, that is one less guy who could step in and fill in if a bunch of injuries happen, which the Timbers were pretty lucky. They had a lot of injuries at center back, but they always kind of seemed to be one after another. It didn't seem to be too much of an overlap, so they always had Brunner and Horst, or Brunner and Footy, or Footy and Horst. They always had some combination of that, but you're not always going to get so lucky. So I understand it from that perspective, but to keep ostensibly five outside backs under contract, that seems to me that's not going to be an area they're going to be focusing on. I don't know that any of those guys, apart from possibly Wallace, have particularly high trade value. So anyway, that was just a little bit interesting to me.
Yeah.
That he was there. I'm glad he is. I like Steve Purdy, but I just didn't. I thought for sure he'd be one of the guys on the block.
Well, I think it kind of comes down to one in the hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. I mean, you've got these guys, what they are. If you let some of them go or trade some of them or do whatever, then you are forced. You absolutely have to go out and find some outside backs or center backs, whatever it is. I think until they find something that they know that is concrete that they can bring in, that they've actually got, I think they kind of have to hang on to these guys. And Purdy is a bit versatile. He was a center back all his career. It wasn't until a year ago, that last second division year, that they sort of converted him out of necessity to a right back. So he's a little bit versatile. Obviously, he's cheaper than most guys, and he's probably going to be pretty agreeable to sitting on the bench or playing primarily reserve minutes, and he gives them some flexibility, I suppose.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's got to be the rationale. Well, let's take a quick break. We're going to iron out our sound issues here for a second, and then we'll be back to talk about the expansion draft. Okay, everybody, welcome back. We have had a few issues with sound, but I think that we're back up and running in a way that people will be able to hear us and see us.
We're back.
Yeah, we're definitely back. We should tell everybody that in case you haven't been able to hear us before now, Everything has been recorded for the podcast, and apologies if it's been a problem or an issue, but you'll be able to catch it later when that goes up through RSS and iTunes and the like. We are very happy to welcome our first guest to the show. We've gone through 3 episodes where you've had to listen to just Kelly and I talking back and forth with each other. So we're happy to welcome Yvan Delia-Lavictoire. You know him better from his handle on Twitter, especially if you speak French, Le Deuxième Joueur. How's it going?
I'm good, you?
Doing well. Happy to be broadcasting audio again. We're going to start talking here about the expansion draft. The whole draft took place on Wednesday, which was a day after our last show. So we have not talked about this at all. So we thought it was a perfect time to bring you in and see what you think from a Montreal perspective, and then got a couple of questions beyond just the draft. But maybe just start by talking about the drafting of Brian Ching at the top, and then just kind of in general what you think about the players who were acquired through the draft and through the trades on draft day.
I think it fits perfectly with what the coach was saying throughout the weeks prior to the expansion draft. I know I've met him a few times before that, and he was always saying the same thing. Basically, he wanted to have an experienced team, but bringing a little bit of youth. And by having, first choice was Brian Ching, obviously, but we all know the reasons that he might not be joining Montreal. But a player like Brian Ching will definitely bring that experience factor to what Marsh was saying as well. And if you look at the whole list, we have quite a few players that are between maybe like 27 to 30-year-old, Brian Ching being the oldest at 33. But we have, for example, we have Bobby Burling, we have Justin Mapp that are somewhat more experienced players, and I think they can bring something that the team will need for next season. Apart from that, we have also, I think Josh Gardner is a bit older, and that's it. I think all the other players are a bit younger and bring that speed factor, that energy factor that Marshall was looking at as well. I think he's brought in a few good additions. If you look at the young players that he's brought in, Zarek Velanston is one of the good prospects that we've sort of hoping to see in Montreal.
Is there a concern that the wage bill is going to be quite high? I mean, guys like, if Ching does stay, and we'll talk maybe about that in a second, whether or not he does. But I mean, just looking at some of the salaries, I mean, there are a number of guys who are making well over $100,000 in the team, and some, like Ching and now Donovan Ricketts, who are making quite a lot of money. Is that going to be an issue, or is it not? Is it just not even matter at this point that'll sort of be sorted between now and the start of the season?
There hasn't been a lot of mention about the salary in terms of if they're going to have issues with it in the upcoming weeks or before the season. But I think for now, the list that they have, or the players that they have, they're satisfied with. And I'm not sure if they're going to bring in more higher paying players. But I think for now it hasn't been much of a concern from the team and from the club's perspective. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, the other players that they've added don't really seem to. Well, obviously with Donovan Ricketts requires a certain high salary, but the other players are all, I think, minimum salary, and the college players also don't really require a lot of money.
Well, another question just regarding, not to be too negative with the questions just from the start, because I actually think Montreal's done a pretty nice job with the players they brought in. But I saw it pointed out, and then I looked, and yeah, it's true. Not a single Canadian has been added to the roster, let alone any Québécois players.
Yeah.
Obviously, Andre Hainaut is a target of sorts. I think it probably remains to be seen whether or not that's actually going to work out. But is that something that the local fan base are going to have an issue with, or doesn't really matter as long as the team's good?
No, there's definitely going to be an issue with that, because even from the evaluation camp that Marsh did in the fall after the season, there's a bit of concern about how many local players we had, and about because they released a few local players that we had, players that had been there for about 10 years and so on. So the concern was always there. I'm not sure right now how big this concern is. I think people are still looking to see which are going to be the next players that the Marsh will add. If that shows that he's not adding Canadian players, then there might be a little bit of a people will complain, obviously, if we don't have local players, because I think that's the cultural aspect of Montreal being what it is. I think it will be relevant for the team and for the community to have at least, let's hope that it's at least one Québécois player. So if there's three, well, that's even better for us. And if it's Haino, well, even better.
Yeah, Yvan, this is Kelly. People in Portland are a little bit curious about Ryan Poor and that deal and how all that went down. What was your take on Ryan Poor coming in on the loan deal and is, as of yet, not having any indication that he'll end up in Montreal?
Well, actually, it was a really good surprise this summer that we managed to get players like Ryan Poor in. I mean, he's been one of the good players in the NASL for the past 3 years, and to have him this summer, I think, helped us a lot in terms of maybe getting back and trying to make the playoffs. But so far, there hasn't been much said to be about about Ryan's implication or involvement in the team next year. The last thing I heard from Jesse Marsh concerning Ryan Poor was that there were going to be announcements made soon. Whether or not that's positive or negative, I don't really know. I'm guessing it will be positive, because if I look back at some tweets that might not be the best reference, but Ryan Poor was saying how he loved Portland, and he thanked the fans for supporting him all that time. So I'm not sure if it was a goodbye or just a simple thank you tweet, but I think he's getting closer to a move, perhaps in Montreal. That being said, there hasn't been much said either from the media point of view here or from the club itself.
Another guy who was there in the summer, who came in sort of in the middle of the year for you guys, was Sinisa Ubiparapovic, who the club have now signed to a sort of a regular deal, not just a loan deal. What was your impression of him, and maybe what do you think also about a guy like Miguel Montano?
Well, first of all, Ubiparapovic, I think, changed our season. I mean, with Ryan Poor, he scored a lot of goals, but he had I wouldn't say the support, but the help and the creativity of a guy like Sinisa. Just the fact that we had, I think, the luck to see him play in the NSL this summer. Just he was so relaxed on the ball, and so I think he found it even too easy for himself. He barely running, just finding the right touches, finding the right passes. I think that helped us for the second division season, or helped the second part of that season. But in terms of what he can bring to the MLS season, I think if he plays in the same role that he did this summer, or if he does play in a similar role, I think we'll be in good hands. Now it's just to see if he can get the consistency that people in New York were sort of complaining about, because they were saying that he wasn't putting a lot of good games one after the other. He was probably putting one good game, and then putting in 2 or 3 average displays. So I think that will be a concern. But if he can pull up and have a consistent season next year, I'll be happy, and I think the fans will be happy. As for Montano, I think I didn't really, from a personal point of view, I think I didn't see a lot from him this summer to tell me that he has the quality to be an MLS striker, if an MLS starter. He certainly has the speed, the skill set, but I'm not sure if he can be able to go into that starting 11 role next season. And again, for him, I think it's still undecided where he'll be next season. But again, rumors have been saying that he's almost on the verge of signing here, so we'll see what happens.
Is there any concern on either your part personally or on the part of fans in Montreal that 2 players now have very publicly said they'd rather retire than move to Montreal?
I don't know. There's sort of that second one was weird by Sinovic. I mean, he's 24 years old.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm guessing people like to hate Montreal, and Montreal fans even love that more. Yeah, I think they'll be sort of that, not hatred, but the people in Montreal will be like, well, hey, if you don't want to come here, we'll find someone else to play your position or pick your spot. So that's not really a problem. The issue, I think, is more the pride factor. I mean, coming from, Montreal is a proud city, and people are saying, well, if Brian Ching would rather stay in Houston than come in a city like Montreal, well, he's probably got a problem. And they said the same thing about Sinovich. But no, there's not a big concern about it. I mean, if we get him, good. But if we get, we got someone like Davy Arno to take Sinovich's spot. So I'm happy with that, and I think the fans are overall happy with that. He's got the experience definitely the experience to play in this league.
What's the expectation up there from the fans and the organization itself as far as what they want to get out of their first season? Is it the stock answer of, well, we expect to make the playoffs, or have they talked at all about what their expectations are?
In terms of the team?
Yeah.
The expectations are, he says it, and it might be a bit cliche, but he wants to put in a competitive team. Whether or not they want to make the playoffs and challenge for the final, the MLS Cup is still unknown. But no, they really want to put a solid team in, and just a team that can compete and that can have a somewhat consistent season as well. I mean, they're expecting to have a difficult period at some point this season. I think that having someone like Marsh will be good for us. But from a club perspective, I think they just want to stay relevant and maybe challenge for a playoff spot and then make the playoffs, and then who knows. And from a fan's perspective, though, is I think be optimistic and aiming high as always, and see maybe go all the way. As far as I go, I think I'd rather have a constant building process, in the sense that you maybe for the first season we're getting to the playoffs or getting close to the playoffs, and then who knows in 2-3 years where we might be. Apart from that, I mean, it's still really tough to say, because we still have the preseason camp, which I think will help us decide, or help the club decide which will be the starting 11, and then from then on we'll see if we have the team to compete come the first week of March.
Given the team that exists right now is not going to be the final roster by the time the season starts, who's the player that excites you the most? That kind of you look at and say, wow, that guy, I'm really surprised that we got that guy, and he can really, I know he can do it in MLS. I can't wait to see him do it here for Montreal.
I think that I was happily surprised to see him join the team. I've seen him a few times play with Colorado, and I think I was really happy to see him come here, and I think he can bring that not trickery, but that sort of speed on the wing, and play and help the team in its season. That being said, he might not be the best experienced player that we'll have next season, but he's still very young, and I think he'll bring that sense of speed and not, I wouldn't say, but the sense of not creativity, but that energy that he'll bring will help.
Regarding the stadium, let me switch gears to the stadium really quickly.
Yeah.
Because that's going to play a big part, as it did, here in Portland this year, as it did in Vancouver, as it did in Kansas City, as I'm sure it will in Houston. Just the stadium, where does that stand in terms of renovations? Maybe talk a little bit about the Big O and what you expect from the Olympic Stadium.
Yeah, I was actually at the stadium on Friday to see on the progress of the whole renovation, and the guy who's in charge of the renovation is basically told me, well, we said it's a renovation, but it's basically we're sort of rebuilding an entirely new stadium, which is probably why we're going to be ready not in March but in June. So I mean, we knew it from the start, from the first announcement, that we're going to have to wait and play a few games at the Olympic Stadium. But I think I'm actually waiting impatiently to have our first game, at home at the Saputo Stadium, because as much as I like the Olympic Stadium, we need to have a lot of people in there to have an actual atmosphere and then a game night atmosphere. And we did it once with the 52,000 for a CONCACAF Champions League game, and that was amazing. But I hope we can do the same for a league game, but it all depends who we're going to bring in as an opponent for these first 4 games at the Olympic Stadium. It's a nice venue. I think it's part of Montreal, but we need to have a full crowd and a capacity crowd, if you want, to have that atmosphere and that that sense of this is a MLS game that's happening. So that's my only concern right now. Yeah.
Is there an expectation that it will be basically capacity at Saputo whenever it's open and every game going forward?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think once we get into the MLS, there'll be a sort of a bandwagon effect, if you want. I'm thinking right now. I think the last time they announced the season tickets were at 5,000. I'm guessing they'll be a bit higher with the expansion draft announcements, with the shirt unveiling, the shirt launch on Thursday. I think that'll help. And as closer as we're going to get to the season, I think people will sort of jump in and see, get interested in the team and the MLS. And 20,000 is a good number for Montreal.
That's overall capacity, not season tickets, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I don't think we'll sell 20,000 season tickets. I think they're aiming at, I'm not sure exactly, maybe 8,000 or 10,000, but I'm not sure on that number.
Well, let me ask you one, Kelly, unless you have another question. I want to ask a little bit about just sort of the cultural part. And you talked about it earlier in regards to whether or not there are any Quebecois players in the team. But, this is sort of being hailed as the introduction of a third language into MLS. There's sort of the Chivas USA effect with Spanish and just generally with quite a number of Hispanic and South American born players. Is it really going to be a big deal, do you think, for the entire league, or is the sort of French and French-Canadian aspect of Montreal going to basically just be a local phenomenon and not really affect the league?
I think it's going to affect the league. I think people are curious about what the French-Canadian community is. I think they might have a few ideas of what it is, but it probably might not be the actual thing that we have here. A lot of people are saying that Montreal is a very lively city, so I think that will be another factor for people to come in. But there's this whole sense of curiosity and just to see how French-Canadian people, behave at soccer stadiums and not. I've spoken to a few fans at the Supporters Summit in Los Angeles about 2 weeks ago, and there's that sense of we don't really know what Montreal is, we don't really know what they're all about, but we're sort of interested in what they'll bring, and we sort of want to go and see what's going on in Montreal. So that whole sense of the unknown, I think, will be good for the MLS and will be good for Montreal also.
And finally, do you think there are going to be? Do you think there will be a good presence at away games? I'm sure it'll be regionally dependent, as it is for everyone. But do you expect a large number of fans to go to, say, Toronto or New York or New England, places that are reasonably close?
Oh, definitely. I think with the Ultras, I'm pretty sure these guys will be ready to go to Toronto and New York and closer places. I'm thinking also maybe people outside of that ultra community or that ultra movement will be interested in maybe going for weekend trips or something or stuff like that for these away games. I mean, it's something that people want to know about. They've seen it on TV. They've seen how Toronto. They've seen a lot of Toronto FC games in the past five years. So there's that sense of we can go support our team, and it's only it's a 5-hour drive, so it's not that much of a big deal. But I think these away games will be good if we can get maybe a few hundred fans to get on the road with the team.
Excellent. Well, I guess let's leave it there for now, and we will have you back once the season gets going, or maybe before the season starts, to kind of give an update, what's going on, how the stadium is looking, and how the team shapes up. Because as we are sort of saying, there's only about half of the team in place now, so it is sort of an incomplete picture. But we very much appreciate the time, and Yeah, no, we're happy to have you, and we'll have you again.
Well, thank you very much, guys.
Excellent. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Interesting. Well, I think it's kind of, having done the the expansion process last year, and in Vancouver doing the same, it's kind of interesting to watch it a year removed and sort of see the excitement of a building roster and stadium construction and those kinds of things. It doesn't make me long for those days in any way,
right?
But it is kind of cool, and to have the advantage of being the only team in the expansion draft instead of having two,
right?
I think afforded a little bit more quality, sort of top to bottom, and a little bit more flexibility in terms of making trades, knowing that they were the only team kind of in the market or directly, involved. I am looking forward. I hope the Timbers have an away game against Montreal this year, but who knows? It could be 2013 before that's a possibility.
Well, you've been vocal out there on Twitter expressing your love for Montreal.
I have. I find it interesting, sort of what Yvan was talking about, just the different nature of Montreal. It's a city I've been to, I think 3 or maybe 4 times. So it is a city that I really like. I think it's very, I guess people just haven't been there, because I think anybody who goes there loves it. It's very much a European city. By far the most European feeling city in North America, I think. Very old city. And then having the sort of dual language thing, I think that is sort of, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting. It just gives a totally different feel. It's a totally different type of place than say, Columbus or Kansas City. I mean, it's not another American city. It's a very unique place. So I think there's between the community and the history. I mean, the Impact have been around for 20 years, in various leagues, Canadian leagues, and then in the, all the different various names of the second division in the U.S. I mean, Montreal's been around. They have a real presence. It's not starting from complete scratch. So I think it's I don't think it's worth just blowing off and saying, oh, well, I wouldn't want to go there like Seth Sinovic.
Right.
Oh, well, I can't move out of my parents' house or whatever the deal is for him in Kansas City. I mean, I know he's from there, but this is one of the more interesting places you can play. And I'm sure if he had an opportunity to go to Europe, he'd take it in a heartbeat. Yet he basically demanded a trade from Montreal, right, which is as close as it gets to Europe in North America. So anyway, obviously once the season starts, I'll be 100% behind the Timbers. But at this point, I just find it, until yesterday, it was much more interesting to follow the roster movements of Montreal than most other teams.
Exactly.
Well, let's hit our weekly Merritt Paulson Twitter update.
Yeah,
a couple of things he mentioned have since been sort of overtaken. But why don't you kind of mention a few things that he was talking about?
There was a couple of things. Somebody asked him if, in light of what we were just talking about, the Montreal's expansion draft, is there a pick you wish that you had done differently? Someone asked Merritt. And he got kind of an odd reply. He said the Bornstein-Findlay selections, but then later I responded and he responded back saying that it was more of obviously a long-term kind of thing. But I thought that was interesting that was his first initial response to being asked, is there anything you think the Timbers should have done differently? Especially when you know that it's only been a year, and you would never assume that those guys would be coming any sooner than a year in. But so not quite sure. I think there was a little bit of Twitter confusion there perhaps, but I thought that was pretty interesting. He did also reference another DP. Again, I mean, sort of nothing specific obviously, but he did say that a DP is another possibility. So not sure if that's going to mean something like, people like to say or ask, is there going to be a big name, DP signing, or if it's going to be more of like a Diego Chara DP signing. We don't know, but he did hint that might be a possibility as well. And then there was the information that he tweeted about that basically we now know about players not having their options exercised, and so now we know that information. But there were a few little interesting tidbits here and there.
Yeah, and another thing that happened was he had a little bit of a back and forth with the guys from Stumptown Footy, who put in a bunch of legwork to figure out which player for the Colombian club Chico was going to be the one that Gavin Wilkinson had been watching, and Merritt pretty much said, yeah, the guy's not from Chico, but A for effort,
right?
For looking and so.
But in that process,
the next thing.
Yeah, in that process, he did sort of give out another piece of information, didn't he? And I forget exactly what that was.
He basically said that he wasn't going to hint anything or tease anything, and then he proceeded to tease that the player in question was all but signed, and that he that he was a national team player, either in the U20s or the first team, and it was significant, I think, that he said possibly the U20s, and then he said that he came from good lineage or something right? Something like that. And so people have sort of taken that and run with it. And one of the other teams that Gavin saw on his trip in the first week of November was Santa Fe, which is a Bogota club. And I forget now the team that they were playing, but it's the team that's managed by Juan Carlos Osorio, if that's his name, right? And the other team was not Santa Fe. And this was referenced in the Timbers website had an article where they kind of ran through the games that he went to and said that Gavin had a nice chat with him as a guy who is who has MLS experience as a manager and all these things. Like, it was good kind of reference point on, ages and abilities and skill sets and these kinds of things. Well, the team that team was playing against, Santa Fe, have a player, young guy named Jose Adolfo Valencia, whose father, Adolfo Valencia, also known as El Tren, I think that's how you say it, the train, was a huge star in Colombia, was on their World Cup team, actually scored against the U.S., scored twice in the 94 World Cup. He played for Bayern Munich, Atletico Madrid, among others, and then he ended up for not at the very end of his career, but towards the end of his career, playing for the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars. 2001 and 2002 was a big scorer for them. I think he had 16 goals one season, and so his son is 19. He turns 20 in a couple of weeks, and this is a guy. I think when people look back, they may remember there was a big article on the MLS website about the changes in the MLS rules regarding young designated players, that the impact on salary cap for under 20 and under players and 23 and under players would be significantly different from the way that Diego Chara is a designated player. So with each, the younger you get, the less it counts against your salary cap, right, is basically the way to put it. And that is to encourage investment in up-and-coming players as designated players instead of Rafa Marquez or somebody like that. And so this was a guy, Jose Valencia, was listed among the top 5 on the MLS website's list of under 23-year-olds who are worth keeping an eye on, who could be potential designated players in the future. And actually, they listed the Timbers as one of the possible landing spots for this young man, probably because of both Diego Chara and Jorge Perlaza had already arrived here. So obviously a team with 2 Colombians is a good starting point for a young guy. And that's something that Gavin has been hinting at. We've talked about it on the show before, that they're considering bringing in a young player to kind of be mentored by, if you will, Chara and Perlaza. Now this kid is a beast by all accounts. He's a striker. He's really good. He played in the U20 World Cup, which was in Colombia. He scored in the group stage. Was mostly used as a reserve. But he seemed by, again, you can't take everything on Twitter to be press release material. Right. But given the sort of parameters that were laid out, and given the teams that we know Gavin saw on his trip based on that article, it does seem like this kid is a real possibility of a player that they're considering. Whether or not they'll actually sign him, I don't know. That's been something in the past that we've kind of noted, that they've looked at quite a few players, and we don't know what happened in the end, but they didn't end up signing. with the Timbers. But that's a player to keep an eye on for sure. There's a lot of names out there, ideas that the Timbers are looking at young defenders and things. But this is a young striker who I think would be a great addition, in part because of the existing presence of Perlaza and Chara, and also just on his own merit that he seems to be a very promising young player. And since he is based in Colombia now, I mean, there are some other really, really fantastic young Colombian players, but they're already playing in Europe. The one, I forget his name, but he plays at Porto, and he's a regular in this, at Porto already, and he's 19 or 20. So maybe this guy isn't quite at that level, but he does seem to be quite good. And that's, anyway, something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, we shall see.
I mean, we're kind of expecting that the Timbers will make some moves now that the roster only has 22 members.
Yeah.
They're going to have to. We know there will be drafts, collegiate drafts and such, but they've cleared the space now for players of some kind. They're going to come from somewhere, and it doesn't seem like trades necessarily at this point because they actually have 8 roster spots to fill. So that's coming. Whether it's coming this week, whether it's coming this month, or December, who knows? But I think by the time they start training camp, I expect that this year they're going to have the majority of players in camp. That once that they may have to wait till January for some international players given the transfer window. But the fact that the camp doesn't start until mid-January, I think, means we're going to see a mostly full roster heading into camp, and that's what you want. That's the benefit of the second year. And going forward,
and we also need to keep tabs on their international spots, because I think they've got 8 right now, which isn't that what each team is allotted each year? And if they're going to go,
I thought they were allotted 7.
Oh, is it 7? Okay, so I mean,
so.
If they're going to bring in some outside players, there's got to be some movement somewhere to get another 1, 2, 3. International spots if they're going to need those. So I think we probably can still suspect some moves in that regard as well.
Yeah, because the only spot that's now open in that regard that we know at this point is that Brian Umoni is not back. However, some of the spots were only for 1 year anyway.
Right.
So that's gone. And then the Timbers did trade an international spot to Montreal for the right, or for the, basically the right to not have any players taken in the expansion draft. So it is I am unsure as to the number of
exactly
international spots that the Timbers have at the moment. We're also hearing that as many as 2 or 3 players could earn green cards between now and the start of the season, which would mean it should either mean they would need less international spots, or that they would have more to work with for other players. That guys, I expect that one of those players will be Darlington Nagbe. I don't know where they stand on that, but I would say he would be more likely than Khalif Al Hassan, for example, to be one of those players to pick up a green card. So well, we're kind of running towards the end of time. Just with the sound issues before, we're going to go a little bit over today, but I'm just going to do my little A-League minute here to wrap things up, and then you've got a kind of a cool little thing to mention at the end. Just really quickly, Brisbane Roar, I've mentioned them before. They're now 36 games unbeaten in the A-League. That includes going through the playoffs last year, and they won over the weekend with a 4-0 win over Perth Glory. 36 games unbeaten is a national record for any sport in Australia. They passed a rugby club from like 1936 or something like that for the all-time national record. So this was a really big deal over the weekend that they got to 36 games. They're really, really quite good, not just in the context of the A-League. We'll see them in the Asian Champions League soon, and I think that'll be a bigger test in some respects. Interesting game. A lot of people watched this game. It was live on Fox Soccer Channel the other night, on Saturday night. And Melbourne Victory ended up with a 3-2 home win over Gold Coast United. There was a penalty in the first minute of the game. There were 3 penalties overall in the first half. Melbourne Victory had a player sent off in the first half. It was just a completely wild game. Ended 3-2 with a header from the Costa Rican international Carlos Hernandez. He actually scored 2 of their goals. And then Wellington Phoenix I'm not sure if the video is going to work here or not, but I'll post a link to it. Wellington won 2-1 over Sydney in Wellington, a place they usually do well. Tim Brown is a Phoenix player who scored on a volley from basically 50 yards, not quite midfield, but it was ridiculous. It just put it right, just basically chipped the goalkeeper from 50 yards. After the goalkeeper just sent it directly to him. So it is an amazing goal, probably the front runner for goal of the year in the A-League so far. And I will find some way to show all of you that video, whether it's a link on our Twitter page or something.
Yeah. And then to finish up, we had an employee of the Portland Timbers was on a TV show, little acting spot there. Beto Angulo, he's sort of one of the equipment guys. He's not the head equipment guy, but he kind of helps out in that regard and does lots of little odds and ends. He had a nice little spot on the TV show Leverage. So for those of you who don't know, I think that's a TNT show, and it's filmed here in Portland. So Beto was on Leverage. He busted into a party as a cop and announced that somebody was going to get arrested, that he had a warrant for somebody's arrest. And he was quite convincing. And you may not know Beto by name, but actually most people are familiar with Beto because if you've ever read a Portland Timbers article or an article about the Timbers or Diego Chara or Jorge Perlaza, and they were quoted and it said something like, Perlaza said through a translator, it was likely that Beto was that translator. So
almost certainly, yeah.
Yeah, so most of you are actually familiar with Beto, and that was the most recent episode of Leverage that was on Sunday night, so I'm guessing that TNT, replays that, frequently.
I think it was the
week.
Season premiere of this.
Was it? Okay.
Season.
Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he was on there, and he was quite convincing. For a moment, I thought he was coming to arrest me. He was fabulous. So congrats to Beto on getting a little bit of fame there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really cool. And Leverage is, as you mentioned, filmed in Portland. One of a few shows being filmed around here at different parts of the year. You can usually tell where they are as opposed to Portlandia because they have a lot more equipment, and a lot more trucks and those kinds of things. Well, let's leave it there. We will have this posted as a podcast and available. The whole chat with Yvan will be there. And Montreal, definitely worth keeping an eye on. He's a good one to follow. And so thanks for listening. We will be back next week. We're working on a little bit of a special occasion, possibly doing an on-location broadcast. We will have more information about that as the week goes on. But in the meantime, keep an eye out for Timbers news and updates, and we will speak to you next week.
See you next week.